Armageddon Survival Plan, the key. For printed version please contact JAH at JAH.truth.net. Chapter 11. Satan's use of religions to divide, deceive, conquer and rule. Satan, Lucifer, asked God to let him live until the last day, even though he had refused to do his best to learn to be good, along with his former followers. Surah 7, verse 14 and Surah 15, verse 36. God granted his request, so that he could use him, to test the souls of his ex-followers. Job 1, verse 12 and Job 2, verse 6 and 7. Satan, the devil, swore to attack you, from the front, and from the rear, and from your left, and your right, and waylay you, and pull you off the straight and narrow track. Matthew 7, verse 13 and 14, Surah 7, verse 15, and seduce you into following his evil ways. Surah 7, verse 27. He will attack you from every possible angle, from within, telepathically, with fear, and with what you wrongly think is your imagination running riot, which is really Satan, telepathically trying to frighten you, by saying frightening things will happen to you. Genesis 6, verse 5, and from without, by sending people to get in your way, to try to stop you, or by sending women to seduce you, and thereby prevent you from doing what you should be doing, that is what is right, God's will. Lucifer, Satan, lays in wait, to seduce those who are not children of God, and who are not doing God's will, and talking to him continuously. Satan will also attack, and try to trick, those who are children of God, and pull them off the straight and narrow track, that they are on, or at least slow them down, and or stop them from continuing on their way home, if he can. 1 Peter 5, verse 8. Satan uses lies, to deceive the whole world. Revelation 12, verse 9, just as he did in the Garden of Eden, to trick Eve, because she did not do God's will. Surah 7, verse 22, Genesis 3, verse 4. Never underestimate the devil. The devil attacks everyone, except those whom he has already seduced, into doing what he wants them to, and who are unknowingly following him, to the fire and execution, already, because he considers everyone, that does God's will, to be a traitor, to himself. Remember that you all fought with Satan, against God. If you do good, you automatically become a threat to Satan, and you must expect him to attack you, and that is when you need to wear God's armor. Ephesians 6, verse 11 to 17. If Satan doesn't attack you, then you must be already doing what he wants you to do. Man's soul has always reached for the stars, without understanding why, and it is because the soul is subconsciously homesick, without knowing why, or where it is really from. People started to worship planets, as gods, as the souls were blindly reaching out for home and their loved ones, and Satan deceived them, into worshipping many different planets, to keep them from the truth and God. Later on, he created the worshipping of idols, graven images and false gods. God prohibited the worshipping of idols and false gods, so Satan had to find a new way to deceive the world, and hit on the idea of turning belief in God into organized religions. Religions would build a wall, or barrier, between the soul and God, turning some into priests, and making priests into false gods. Matthew 23, verse 5 to 7 and Luke 11, verse 43, and the blind leading the blind, away from God, and into the ditch or fire. Matthew 15, verse 14, Hosea 4, verse 9 and Malachi 2, verse 1 and 2. God had given the book to Moses, Torah/Old Covenant, and forbidden the worshipping of anything other than himself. Satan then created the Jewish religion and traditions, the Talmud, and superstitions, preventing people from doing God's will, and having direct contact with him. Religions build a wall, between the soul and God. Priests do not teach about God. They have absolutely no idea who God really is, or where heaven is, even though they spend much of their time repeating parts of the Bible or Quran, because they are blinded by their own religious organizations' teachings and misinterpretations. Priests teach rituals, they do not teach about God, because, if they really knew anything about God, they would be afraid of being priests, and resign. Satan uses their egos to fool them into thinking that God's rules do not apply to them. What arrogance! God's rules apply to everyone, up to, and including Prince Michael, and God himself. God is not a hypocrite, and he too lives by his own rules, so who are the priests, to think that God's rules do not apply to them? God sent Jesus to destroy religions, and to bring people back to direct contact with their God, and to doing God's will, and to set them a good example to follow. After the crucifixion, the disciples wrote the New Testament. The Jews and their religion murdered Jesus, the man, and then refused to accept God's messages, and the New Covenant, Testament, and they continued to cling to their evil religion. The devil then turned Jesus' teachings into another organized religion, and the same thing happened again, only more efficiently, because the world was now further divided, and easier for Satan to control. God then enlightened Muhammad with messages to try to unite the world, and also the same message, that organized religion is wrong, and that people must do God's will. The same thing happened again, and it became yet another organized religion. Satan's greatest success was when he managed to get Muhammad's students to misunderstand and twist God's message, and discredit Jesus, and write it in the Quran. It was his greatest success, for two reasons, the first being, that the Arabs would not read the New Testament, and follow Jesus' example, and teachings, even though the Quran says that they must. Surah 6, verse 154 to 157, and thereby leave them going in circles, and getting nowhere. The second reason is, that it made it possible for Satan to set the three religions against each other, and have their adherents, often, murdering each other. This would keep them so busy, that they would not have time to think about how stupid they were all being, and that they all worship the same God. The Lord sent all three books, and, because Satan divided them into separate religious groups, they each only read one book, which is really only 1/3 of the whole book, so none of them have any chance of understanding, or knowing, the truth. Anyone who does not have direct contact, and enlightenment, which only comes when the self dies, has absolutely no chance of understanding the truth, by reading only 1/3 of God's book. God has always intended that the Torah, New Testament and Quran, should be one book. How can anyone, who reads only 1/3 of a book, know the full story? The best lies always contain an element of truth, and that is why religions have worked so successfully, for Satan. Most of the religions in this world contain an element of truth, and the rest is made up of lies. The devil takes God's name, and mixes it with superstition and lies, stirs it up with elements of the truth, and then has the perfect recipe to deceive the world into believing that organized religions belong to God. Organized religions belong to Satan, and use and abuse God's name. How can you be so stupid as to believe that organized religions belong to God, when they have murdered more people, throughout the known history of this world, than everything else combined, and are still doing so? It is totally illogical, and absurd, to even consider believing that organized religions could possibly belong to God, when they are murdering people, and God commands you not to murder. Open your spiritual eyes, and see things as they really are. Only the truth can set you free. John 8, verse 32, the King of Kings Bible, John 8, verse 23. You cannot be taught God's will for you, by anyone except God, because He is the only one who knows exactly what each individual soul needs to learn, before He will allow them to come home. Priests have no idea who God is, and are preventing people from going back to heaven. Matthew 23, verse 13 and Thomas 15, verse 10. They just repeat bits from their books, like trained parrots, dressed up in their silly clothes. Each person has the devil inside them, tempting them, including priests, of whom there have been many, throughout history, who have been guilty of child molesting, running away with other men's wives, etc., proving that they can be just as evil as everyone else, and sometimes worse. How can someone, who is evil, teach you how to be good? If you have direct contact with God, you only have one devil's voice to fight, and that is your own devil's voice, inside your own head, and you then minimize the devil's chances of deceiving you. It is difficult enough to fight him, without giving him a chance to use reinforcements. When you put religions and priests between yourself and God, and each person in between has their own devil's voice to overcome, you are multiplying, many times over, the devil's chances of deceiving you, and leading you astray, as he promised to do. That is one of the reasons why Satan invented religions. How can a priest forgive your sins? Who do they think they are, that they think that they have the power, or right, to forgive sins? Who says that they represent God? God certainly does not. He has said, over and over again, that they do not represent him, but represent the devil. The Jews say that only Jewish people will go to heaven, because of the reference to the 12 tribes of Israel, when they are only a remnant from 2 of the 12 tribes, being descended from the house of Judah, emblem, fig tree. The other 10 lost tribes of Israel, called the house of Israel, emblem, olive tree, who are by far the majority of Israel, and which, today, are Britain. The British throne is the throne of David, and the Commonwealth, America, the Celts, Scandinavia, the Netherlands and the 3 Baltic states, have all accepted Christ, at least nominally. Matthew 15, verse 24. Abraham was told, in Isaac shall your seed be called, that is known as Isaac's sons. Saxons, Saxons, Anglo-Saxons. Genesis 21, verse 12. The 12 tribes of Israel is meant, not only literally, but also metaphorically, to represent all the tribes of the world. Luke 13, verse 29, because of the grafting into Israel of the Gentiles. Anyone who keeps the commandments, and does God's will, is automatically an Israelite, and grafted in. This reference gave Satan the opportunity, because the 10-tribed house of Israel was lost. Matthew 15, verse 24. The word British is Hebrew and means the people of the covenant, that is Israel, to deceive the Jews, using their egos, into thinking that their religion is the right one, and so they arrogantly refuse to accept Jesus, and Muhammad, and the messages that they brought. Matthew 21, verse 42. Note well, Jesus says that their inheritance goes to others. Matthew 21, verse 43, Surah 5, verse 13 and 14. The Roman Catholics say that only Catholics can go to heaven, and the other Christian sects say that only Christians can go to heaven, so they concentrate only on the New Testament, but at least some of them read the Torah, and have combined it with the New Testament, into the Bible. This shows that at least they are more open-minded, and tolerant, than the other 2 groups. Surah 2, verse 113 and Surah 5, verse 15. The Muslims say that only Muslims can go to heaven, because they do not read all of their own book. Surah 2, verse 62 and Surah 5, verse 72. They only read, and misinterpret, the parts that the devil wants them to read and misinterpret. They have become so arrogant, and such fanatics, that they frighten people away, and thereby have prevented, and still are preventing, the adding of the Quran to the Bible, to make up the complete 3/3 of the book. All people, of all colors, nationalities and beliefs, who do God's will, and keep his commandments and covenant/testament. Surah 16, verse 91, written in the Bible, will survive, and all the others, of all colors, nationalities and beliefs, who do not do God's will, and keep the commandments, will perish, in the fire, on the last day. You have God's word on that. Joel 2, verse 32, Luke 13, verse 29 and Revelation 5, verse 9, Surah 2, verse 62, and 112 and Surah 5, verse 72. Satan has conned you all, perfectly. Divide and conquer. The Jews read their 1/3 of the book, Torah, and refuse to accept anything that came after it. The Muslims do exactly the same, in reverse, reading their 1/3 of the book, Quran, and refuse to accept anything that came before it. The Christians stay in the middle, and read the middle 1/3 of the book, and refuse to accept what came before, but especially what came after it. Congratulations. You have all been conned. You had all better start to get it right, now, or you will all win the booby prize. The fire. There are no such things as religions, or nationalities, as far as God is concerned. Satan has deceived you all. How can you be of a particular nationality, or religion? You are not from this planet. There is no such thing as religions, or nationality, unless you want there to be. These things only exist in your minds. The only real difference between you all, is that a few of you believe in God, and most of you don't believe in God, neither of which is any good. God doesn't want you to believe in Him, He wants you to believe Him and get to know Him. John 17, verse 3. Not only are you not Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Buddhists, Hindus, Sikhs, etc., you are not even human, you are from Venus, and are allowing Satan to fool you all, with his lies. John 8, verse 32. The King of Kings Bible. John 8, verse 23. Congratulations. How can you possibly be human, if your soul, the real you, is immortal, when everyone knows that humans are mortal, and have to die? If you were 1/10 as smart, as you arrogantly like to think you are, you might be getting somewhere. Humility, and childlike trust in God's guidance, are the only way to prevent Satan from using your own ego, and arrogance, to fool you into thinking that you are human, and that you are clever enough to run the world, yourselves. Look at the state that you have got the world into. Another way in which religions and priests have been used, by Satan, to fool you all, is with their stupid story, that, if you are good, in your present human life, then you will go to heaven, and, if you are bad, in your present human life, then you will go to hell. You are already in hell, and you have been here for thousands of human years. Hell is not a place with flames, and a man with a fork, and a pointed tail and horns. This is it. The flames are only on the last day, here, to destroy the evil souls. Matthew 13, verse 36 to 42, 49 and 50. Some of you say that you do not think that this planet is hell, or a prison, and that you actually like it here. Only someone who is evil can feel at home in hell, and like being here, with all these bad people. John 12, verse 25, Surah 16, verse 106 to 111. The priests have helped Satan, by maintaining and feeding your egos, and their own, teaching that planet Earth is a good place, and that you are all good, and all sinners at the same time. What a ludicrous contradiction, and how stupid. How can you be good, if you are a sinner? You use the word sinner, because the word bad offends your ego, but they both mean the same. This stupidity has prevented you all from being humble enough, to really ask for, and receive, God's guidance, and has helped to keep you here, all this time. What is absolutely astounding, is that you actually believe that you are good, and that what happens on this planet is normal. Do you actually believe, that all this evil, cruelty, selfishness, murder, rape, theft, child molesting, etc., could happen on a normal civilized planet? It could not happen anywhere else but in hell. which is exactly where you all are, and where all this evil happens. You don't know the meaning of the words, civilized, and good. Isaiah 64, verse 6, and that is one of the reasons why you are still here. If you are like Jesus, genuinely, in your present human life, and your body dies, then you will go to heaven. Anything less will not make the grade, and you will return to hell, earth, in your next body, continually, until you get it right, or run out of time, and then burn in the fire, on the last day. Acts 2, verse 31 to 34. You are all bad, or you would not be here, in prison. God does not keep good people in prison. Be humble and learn to be good. With organized religions in between, like a wall, you will never get to have a personal relationship with God, and get to know and love Him, as the wonderful and loving person that He is, and also be able to feel His love surrounding you, and protecting you from evil. You do not need synagogues/churches/mosques, etc. Every human plus being is a church. Churches, buildings, were only built, as a place of shelter, from the sun, or the rain, etc., or from screaming children, so that you could go, and be at peace, and be able to concentrate on talking to God, and on listening for His telepathic reply. Just look at them now, with locks on the doors, and full of idols and gold, etc. If the church is really God's house, WHO has the right to lock the door, and say that you cannot go in, except for 1 hour, on a certain day. You have to talk to God telepathically, all the time, wherever you are, and your church, you, should be open to Him 24 hours a day. If someone feels that they need a church building, to talk to God, and they are distressed in the middle of the night, in the middle of the week, who has the right to lock them out? No one, that is who. The silly priests say that people will steal their silly idols, and worldly treasures, if they don't lock the doors. There should be absolutely nothing in a church worth stealing, and, if there is, it should be sold, and the money given to the poor, or used, to heat the church, in cold climates, so that a church feels warm and welcoming, just like God. Instead of which, they feel cold, uncomfortable and forbidding, like Satan. God is the God of the living, not of the dead. Catholic churches are full of idols, and graven images, teaching the breaking of the commandments. You shall not make a graven image, of anything in heaven or on earth, or under the sea. You shall not worship idols and graven images. They also have statues of Mary's body, and blaspheme, by saying that she is the Holy Mother of God. Christ Himself said that Mary was not His mother. Matthew 12, verse 47 to 50, and Mark 3, verse 31 to 35, and Luke 8, verse 19 to 21. Mary was no one special. Luke 11, verse 27 and 28, except that she was a good mother, and had good qualities, that God wanted Jesus to learn, to help prepare Him for His work. The Roman Catholics also bow down to graven images of the Son of Mary, which was only a human animal that I used, and was not me, and worship it as God. Jesus Himself said that people must not worship Him, but just worship only God. Matthew 19, verse 16 and 17, and Mark 10, verse 17 and 18. How can you all be so disobedient, and stupid, when you are all under the death sentence, and your time is running out? John 3, verse 18, and John 5, verse 24. All the prophets have spoken directly to God, and have done His will, and have been against religions, and have lived apart with God. This does not mean living in a monastery, or commune, it just means getting away from religions. Hiding from temptation, in a monastery, will do you no good, because you have to face temptation, and overcome it, to win favor with God, by facing temptation and overcoming it. James 1, verse 2 to 4. You are, thereby, also setting a good example, to others, and can help the weaker ones to overcome their temptations, by giving them moral, spiritual support. Surah 57, verse 27. Hiding in a commune, or monastery, is the coward's way out, but they are only cheating themselves, because the more temptation you overcome, the nearer you get to going home. James 1, verse 2-4. Avoiding temptation is wasting what precious little time you have left, and is like running on the spot, on a conveyor belt rolling towards the fire, where you are going nowhere fast, except the fire. These communes only create fear, and do more harm than good, for the former reason, and the following ones. The bigger they become, the greater the number of people that are wasting their time, and, because people without faith always fear what they do not understand, public opinion is set against them. If they become really big, the people outside get frightened, and eventually they will attack it. Religious wars start in the same way. John 16, verse 2. These people should go home, to teach their families, and fight for God. Jesus said that he came, not to bring peace, but a sword, the word of truth. Hebrews 4, verse 12, and that a man's enemies would be the members of his own household. Luke 12, verse 51-53. This is because they will be used by Satan, to try to pull you away from your belief. Micah 7, verse 6. If they don't, then you are not doing it right, because Jesus has told you, it will happen, if you are doing it right. Matthew 10, verse 34-40. Don't run away and hide in communes. Get on home, and fight to convince the people that love you, that they are wrong. Love your enemies. Fight with the sword of truth, not your fists. Truth and light conquer all darkness and evil. Light destroys darkness painlessly, and easily, and so does the light of truth, when combined and delivered with love. Stop being such cowards. Put on God's armor. Ephesians 6, verse 11-19, and show people the way. You once fought against God, and that got you sent here. The only way out, is to fight the devil, to prove to God that you have changed sides, and are fit to come home. Your real families, in heaven, are waiting for you to come home, and they are hoping that you don't die, on the last day, in the fire. The devil's greatest weapon has always been religions, and with them, he has divided, deceived and conquered the world. You must avoid organized religions, like the plague. Revelation 18, verse 4. To make religions even more effective, Satan divided the beliefs even further, into little sects, each with their own customs and beliefs. He is so sneaky, that you must be on your guard, 24 hours a day, and never underestimate him. Cling to God, like a drowning man clings to anything that floats, or you will drown in the lake of fire. Always make sure, before you do anything, that the devil is not deceiving you into doing something wrong, by talking to you with his seductive voice. He is very sneaky. If in doubt, do nothing, until you are absolutely sure that you are following God's orders, and not Satan's. Surah 2, verse 256. Religious wars are one of Satan's favorite games. After Muhammad's enlightenment, and the spreading of his teachings, the devil set the Christians and the Muslims against each other, in the Crusades, in an attempt, through his use of religions, his invention, to stop people from uniting themselves, and their books, and thereby having a chance of knowing the truth. It is ridiculous, that Richard the Lionheart and Saladin were friends, away from the battlefield, and had great respect for one another, and yet, they led their armies against each other on the battlefield, killing each other's soldiers, in God's name. John 16, verse 2. There are stories about Richard being sick, and that Saladin disguised himself, pretended to be a doctor, and sneaked into the English camp, where he treated and nursed Richard back to health. So that they could try to kill each other, on the battlefield, in God's name, Another story tells where Richard and Saladin had a friendly contest, to compare their swords. Richard used his broadsword, and chopped down a tree, to demonstrate the strength of his sword. Saladin used his scimitar, sword, to cut a silk handkerchief into two, in midair, to demonstrate the fine cutting edge of his sword. Why did they have this loving respect for each other? Because they were both honorable, and God-fearing men, and both truly believed that they were doing God's will. Satan fooled them both, with religions. They did not have direct contact with God, so it was easy for Satan, to trick them both. Later on in history, after England had broken away from Roman Catholicism, God helped the British to conquer most of the world, to spread the new doctrine, to try to counteract the Catholic idolatry, and blasphemous brainwashing. How else could a tiny kingdom, like Great Britain, conquer most of the world? The Church of England was still wrong, but probably, at the time, it was the lesser of the evils. Britain then brought peace to the world, and was the world's policeman, for many years. It also helped to bring peace to the Arab world, because the Muslims had become fanatics, in direct disobedience of the Quran. Surah 2, verse 190 and Surah 2, verse 256 and Surah 4, verse 92. Fanaticism always leads to trouble. Another benefit, left by the British Empire, is that it made the English language into the most important, and most widely used language on earth, in preparation for Christ/Prince Michael's second coming, making it easier to spread the truth and enlighten a very dark world, through the universal use of the English language. Jesus and Muhammad are friends, so why aren't the Christians and the Muslims friends? Muhammad and Abraham are friends, so why aren't the Muslims and the Jews friends? Jesus and Abraham are also friends, so why doesn't everyone stop being so stupid, read all 3 parts of the book, become friends, and help each other to earn the right to go home, as all the prophets have said? In the 6th century AD, when Muhammad Mustafa was born, Mecca was an evil place. Muhammad was driven out of it, and fled to Medina. Medina was not as evil as Mecca, and the people of Medina were converted to doing the will of God, Islam. The evil people of Mecca refused to accept the Quran and Muhammad, so Muhammad assembled an army to attack and conquer it, but he failed, because it was not God's will. If it had been God's will, Muhammad would have easily defeated the Meccans, because God says so, in the Quran. Surah 8, verse 65, and God's word is always superior to that of his apostles, on every subject and situation. The Meccans, at that time, made, like now, a great amount of money, from pilgrims coming to worship idols and false gods, at Mecca, and it was a very big and thriving business, that they did not want to give up, because it was their major source of income. That is why they rejected Muhammad, the Quran, and the one true God, because it would have ruined their very lucrative business, and they preferred to continue to serve their god, money. Being unable to defeat the Meccans, because it was not the will of God, God is invincible, some of Muhammad's followers, being afraid, persuaded him to make a deal with the Meccans. The deal was, that they would allow Muhammad into Mecca, only if he made Mecca into the center of the new religion, so that they could continue to make lots of money, from pilgrims visiting the city, and nothing would change, except the name of the religion, and, thereby, the Meccans could continue to serve their god, money. Previously, Muhammad had taught his followers to face Jerusalem, and God's Holy of Holies, on Mount Moriah, which is where Abraham went, to sacrifice Isaac, and proved that he loved God, above everything on earth, and, by doing this, became the first Imam, example, to all of his children, showing them, what they too must also be willing to do, before they too, his children, can become friends of God. Surah 2, verse 124. Once having made the bargain, the Meccans then wrote the Hadith, to make Mecca the new center, and keep their business going. They gave their black rock the name Kaaba, which means Holy of Holies, or House of God, whereas, God, himself, says that there is only one place on earth that is the Holy of Holies, and that is on Mount Moriah, in Jerusalem. where Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac. Genesis 22, verse 1 and 2, and it is referred to, in the Quran, as Abraham's station. Surah 2, verse 125 and Surah 3, verse 97. The Meccans, in their hadith, to further deceive the world, away from Mount Moriah, and to Mecca, have written that Abraham took Ishmael, not Isaac, to their Kaaba in Mecca, to sacrifice him. Whereas, God himself says, in his Quran, that Abraham took Isaac, not Ishmael, to what was to become the Holy of Holies, Kaaba in Arabic, Abraham's station, in the city of peace. Jerusalem. Surah 37, verse 101 and 112. The good news of Isaac and Surah 37, verse 109. Peace, Salem to Abraham, where the city of peace. Jerusalem was later to be built. Surah 2, verse 126. The beginning of peace is when you follow Abraham's example. Salem means peace. God has only ever given permission for one house to be built, for him, on earth, and that is over Abraham's station. The Holy of Holies, the holiest place on earth, which is where Abraham believed only God, and proved his love for God, by offering to sacrifice his son Isaac there. Mount Moriah, the site of the house of the Lord, in Jerusalem. The word Jerusalem means found peace, and a place of safety. Surah 2, verse 125. All of the references in the Quran, to the Holy of Holies, Kaaba, refer to Mount Moriah in Jerusalem, and not to Mecca, as do also the references to his city of peace. Surah 2, verse 126. Jerusalem, where the house of God, or temple, was built by King Solomon. Surah 4, verse 163, over Abraham's station, where he offered Isaac, not Ishmael, to God. Surah 38, verse 45 to 48. The Meccans, in order to keep the deception going, had to discredit the Bible, to stop people from reading it, so that they would never find the truth, and turn away from Mecca, back to Jerusalem, as God intended. The Meccans, in writing the Hadith and discrediting the Bible, have made it impossible, for anyone reading the Hadith, to be able to understand the Quran, and God's truth. They've told the Muslim world that the true Bible no longer exists, which is not only a lie, evil, from the devil, but totally illogical too. They would have the world believe their lie, that God, whom they claim to worship, who is all-powerful, has commanded them to read the Bible. Surah 6, verse 152 to 157, fulfill his covenant. Surah 6, verse 152 and Surah 16, verse 91, which is written only in the Bible and nowhere else, and, even though he is all-powerful, has left the world without the true Bible. They'd have us believe their lie, that an all-powerful God has broken his word, and allowed puny man to destroy his Bible truth. How stupid can people be? God guaranteed in the Quran, Surah 32, verse 23, that the true Bible would reach you, and he commanded the reader not to be in doubt about it. Surah 32, verse 23. We did indeed aforetime give the book, Torah, to Moses, be then not in doubt of it. The Torah, reaching thee, and we made it a guide to the children of Israel. The King James Authorized Version of the Bible is the second most accurate translation in the world, since 2000 AD when the King of Kings Bible was completed, and which is now the most accurate. The Hadith was written after Muhammad's, peace be upon him, death, and it caused the splitting up of Muslims, into different sects, in opposition to the meaning of the Quran, which is all about the gospel of unity. Surah 42, verse 13 to 17, the keeping of God's covenant. Surah 5, verse 8 and Surah 16, verse 91, which is written in the Torah, in the Bible, and becoming a universal brotherhood of believers. So the Meccans made the teachings of God of no effect, by the teaching of their hadith, traditions of the fathers. How blind can people be? The Hadith has become the Talmud of the Muslims, and was condemned by God, in the Quran. Surah 43, verse 21 to 23 and 43, verse 3, which says that God has gone to all the trouble of writing the Quran, so that you can understand it, yourself, if you read it and do what it says, which is, to read the Bible. Surah 6, verse 154 to 156, as well as the Quran, and to pray in private. Surah 7, verse 55, which is exactly what Christ said, in Matthew 6, verse 6, whereupon God will answer you, and teach you what He wants you to do, God's will. If you don't do what God has told you to do, if you want Him to answer you, He will not answer you. Every copy, and the originals, of the Talmud, Hadith and all man-made law books, must be pulped, and recycled as Bibles/Qurans. Then, for the first time in their existence, they'll have done some good. In the Quran, God has told you to go on the pilgrimage, if you're a true believer, and can afford to. God says you must visit Abraham's station. Surah 3, verse 97, Mount Moriah, in Jerusalem, not Mecca. Abraham did not offer Isaac, or Ishmael, at the Kaaba in Mecca. Genesis 22, verse 1 and 2, but Moriah in Jerusalem, because God says so, in the book He's told you to read, and that's the Bible. Surah 6, verse 154 to 156. So the Meccans deceived all Muslims, and prevented the uniting of the books, Bible and Quran, and the fulfillment of Muhammad's mission for God, which was to unite all the true believers, into keeping God's covenant. Surah 16, verse 91, and being His demonstration people, to the rest of the world, of how wonderful it is to live under God's laws, and sovereignty, as one universal brotherhood, all facing and remembering Mount Moriah, as it says in the Quran and in the Bible. Surah 2, verse 144 and 1 Kings 8, verse 29 and 30. The Christians are just as bad as the Jews and Muslims, and started a religion abusing Christ's name, and teaching the opposite of what Christ actually said. That is why God sent the Quran to Muhammad Mustafa, to bring people back to the true faith and teachings, which are, to keep the covenant in the Torah, and do God's will, Islam, which is exactly what Christ actually did say, in the New Testament/covenant. This is reconfirmed by God in the Quran. Surah 43, verse 61, which makes it doubly important and certain. It is the duty of all believers, to free yourselves from all of these evil man-made teachings, unite the three books of God, Old Testament, New Testament and Quran, and yourselves as one brotherhood, all keeping the covenant of God, written in the Torah, Pentateuch, in the Old Testament, and following Abraham's example, in believing only God, and loving God, more than everything on earth, and doing His will. Israelite, Hebrew, equals those who do God's will. Christian, Greek, equals those who do God's will. Islamic, Arabic, equals those who do God's will. Children of God. By adoption. Therefore, they all mean exactly the same, and do not refer to any organized religion. They refer to the children of God, that is those who keep the commandments and also do God's will. Many of you say that you're all children of God, but you're not all children of God. Only those who keep the commandments, and also do God's will, are children of God, and the rest of you are not, no matter what you call yourselves. You are the children of whom you serve. Those who do God's will are His children, and those who continue to do Satan's will remain His children. Billions of you say that you are Israelites, Christians and Muslims, Islamic, but you are not, because, even if you are keeping the commandments, you are not doing God's will. You are just paying lip service to your own particular religion. If you really were children of God, keeping His commandments, covenant and doing His will, you would all be reading the Torah, New Testament and Quran and would be one single brotherhood, and one single worldwide nation. with no divisions, either religious, national, political, language or color. Your neighbor, whom you must love as yourself, is not just the man next door, but also the man on the far side of the planet, and everyone in between. All of the religions belong to Satan. All religions must be destroyed. There will never be peace on earth, until all of the organized religions have gone, and people keep the commandments, the covenant, and do God's will, and return to direct spirit converse with their God. The new covenant is known as the new song, and is the song of Moses. Deuteronomy 31, verse 19-30, harmonized with the song of the Lamb. Revelation 15, verse 3, and Christ says that there are very few that can learn to sing it, keep it. Revelation 14, verse 3, Isaiah 42, verse 10 and Psalms 98, verse 1, and only those who do, will survive. Revelation 14 verse 3, Surah 6, verse 152-157 and Surah 33, verse 23. If you want to live in God's kingdom, you have to keep the covenant and help to set it up, here on earth, with His laws, economic system, etc., with Him as your king and serve only Him, persuading others to do the same, by becoming God's demonstration people to the world. Those who don't will all die.